Good morning. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Minneapolis Audit Committee for Tuesday, July 19th. My name is Lene Palmisano, and I'm the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are Vice Chair Scott Neal, Councilmember John Quincy, and Commissioner Anita Tabb. We do expect Mr. David Fisher to be here shortly. Please let the record reflect we have a quorum. Colleagues, on our agenda today are a presentation from the Office of the State Auditor. Thank you for being here. Several audit reports and our usual report from our internal audit director. Before you is today's agenda as proposed. In consideration of a smoother flow, I'm going to move we amend this agenda slightly, the order of it, to hear the internal auditor's updates and then do announcements before internal audit presents their reports. So this will move items 6 plus announcements up to immediately follow our state auditor's presentation. Our last report, the web security PeopleSoft, requires adjournment to a room where our committee can consider having that discussion in a closed session. Considering this means weighing the public's right to know with considerations for enterprise security. So may I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt that agenda. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and that agenda is adopted. First, we need to accept the minutes from our last meeting, which was May 24th. So I will move adoption of those minutes. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the minutes are adopted. Moving through this agenda, we have no unfinished business to my knowledge, unless there's suggestions from committee members. So we have before us our state auditor's management and compliance report for both the city of Minneapolis and our special relationship with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board for the year 2015. Here to present the state's findings is Ms. Stephanie Erickson. Ms. Erickson, thank you for being here.
Good morning, Chair Palmisano and members of the Audit Committee. My name is Stephanie Erickson, and I'm with the State Auditor's Office, and I'm here to present the results of the audit of the City of Minneapolis, including the General Agency Reserve Fund System, also known as GARFs, the Municipal Building Commission, and the audit of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Before I get started, I'd like to take the opportunity to especially thank the city's Finance and Property Services staff, as well as staff from the Municipal Building Commission and the finance staff from the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and all the other staff that helped and assisted with our audit. I'll go through just a brief summary of how our audit works. We have 3 different stages of our audit. The first is a planning stage. Our audit for the city, for the Municipal Building Commission, and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board was performed in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States. Standards for financial audits contained by government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General of the United States, and also the legal provisions of the Minnesota Legal Compliance Audit Guide for Political Subdivisions. The cities and the Park Board's audit were also performed in accordance with Title II of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200, Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for Federal Audits. Those cover the federal programs that the city and the Park Board receive. During our planning stage, we perform risk assessments. We update our understanding of significant accounts and transaction cycles. We perform our internal control testing and our legal compliance testing. And we meet with finance management and governance to talk about the roles and responsibilities during the audit, the timing of the audit, and some of the details about the year. Finance management is responsible for establishing and maintaining the internal controls, as well as preparing the city's financial statements, so they act as our main point of contact throughout the audit. During our planning phase, we also plan the single audit, which is the audit of the federal programs. In the next phase of our audit, we do our testing of our significant account balances. We audit individual funds. We complete our federal award program audits, and we audit the financial statements and notes to the financial statements while reviewing the remainder of the city's CAFR. And we also hold our progress meetings with management while we go over audit progress and any findings that we have to that date. The last phase of our audit is the wrap-up phase. Here we communicate with attorneys on litigation that might impact financial statements and note disclosures. We prepare and send out the management representation letter to be signed. We finalize our findings to be included in our management and compliance report. And at that time, the city's CAFR and our management and compliance report is going through our office's quality control review process. And at the end, we also meet with management and governance to go over our draft documents to be issued. And here's where a detailed discussion about the findings in our management and compliance report happens. And that meeting was held on June 13th of this year. At the end of the city's audit, we issue 3 main documents. The first is our required communication letter. It's a high-level summary of our audit. It's sent electronically to the city's finance and property services management and governance, along with our management and compliance report. It includes information about our audit, any estimates included in the financial statements, if there were any material audit adjustments or any prior period restatements, as well as any difficulties encountered during our audit. One new item in the letter this year is an explanation that the city implemented new accounting standards, and those were for GASB statements 68, 71, and 82, and those deal with pension liabilities. These statements require the city to record their proportionate share of PARA's liability on the face of their statements and include detailed note disclosures, as well as additional schedules in the required supplementary information section of the city's CAFR. As of December 31st, 2015, the city's portion of this liability was $612 million. Implementing these new standards required a restatement of prior year net position. The next document we issue is our opinion. It was unmodified this year and was dated June 15th of 2016. An unmodified opinion is a clean opinion and the best opinion that can be issued. It means that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects, and our opinion is included in the city's CAFR. We also issue our management and compliance report. This has been emailed to City Finance and Property Services Management, to City Council. It's provided to grantor agencies, and it's also available on our website. It includes a summary of findings and question costs, which is another high-level summary of our audit. In this summary, it states our opinions on the financial statements and compliance for federal award programs, both of which were unmodified for this year. It also indicates whether any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in either internal control over financial reporting or internal control over compliance for major federal award programs were identified during the audit. It provides a listing of our federal award programs audited as major federal programs, and it also lists the city's low-risk auditee status. For 2015, the city was not considered a low-risk auditee, and so we had to audit 40% of the city's federal awards. This report includes our findings on financial statement internal controls, federal award programs, and Minnesota legal compliance. And as I mentioned, these were discussed in detail during our audit progress meetings, as well as our exit meeting with management and governance. Our findings are numbered, stated with the year that they were first reported, and do not necessarily indicate that the same issue is ongoing. For an example, the audit adjustment comment, the number of that comment is 2014 -001. So the first time that we reported it in recent years was 2014. We did have another audit adjustment comment for 2015, but it was not the same. It just followed under the same topic of audit adjustment. So that's why that number is repeated this year. Our report also includes findings from prior year that were resolved. We were able to resolve 2 findings related to internal controls over financial statements, and we were able to resolve 3 findings related to federal award programs this year. City management has provided their responses to our findings, and those are also included in our report. We are required to follow up on these findings during next year's audit, and management is also responsible for preparing a summary schedule of prior audit findings, which we'll ask for at the beginning of our next audit. Our management and compliance report also includes an auditor's report on internal controls over financial reporting, as well as identifying the work that we performed relating to Minnesota legal compliance. Our management and compliance report includes a single audit letter, which includes our auditor's report on compliance for each major federal program, the report on internal control over compliance, and a report on the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And lastly, this report includes the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, which is a listing of all federal programs received and expended by the city for 2015. The total of that schedule was $37.7 million for 2015. We are also responsible at the end of our audit to submit a report on federal awards to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. This is a listing of federal programs, including which programs were audited as major, our opinion on those major programs, any findings associated with those programs, if those programs were part of a cluster, and if any money was passed through to subrecipients. And then we also submit our management and compliance report with that. To date, that has not been submitted for 2015. The form was just released by the federal government last Friday, so we are working on that schedule, and city's management will certify before it's finally submitted. Included in our audit of the City of Minneapolis, we also audit the General Agency Reserve Fund System, or GARFS. This program is required to have an annual audit, and it's required to be issued by April 30th, or 120 days after the year end. A separate report is issued for GARFS, which includes its financial statements and notes, as well as our opinion, which was unmodified. We also issue an auditor's report on compliance with enabling resolutions. And GARFS is a program that's also reported in the city's CPED Enterprise Fund, so it is included in the city's CAFR as well. The city has 4 discrete component units, and we audit 2 of them, one of them being the Municipal Building Commission. And new this year, a copy of MBC's Management and Compliance Report was included in the city's as a separate section. The Municipal Building Commission does not issue separate financial statements, and so their Management and Compliance Report was included with the city's, as well as being issued separately. For the MBC's audit, we also issue our required communication letter, which is similar to the city's. MBC was responsible also for implementing those new pension standards for 2015, and their portion of the liability was $4.5 million, and also required a prior year restatement. Our opinion on MBC's financial statements is included as part of the city's, being that they're included in the city's CAFR, so that was an unmodified opinion. And MBC's financial statements are only reported in the city's CAFR, they aren't issued separately. MBC is issued a management and compliance report, which was emailed to the MBC management, the MBC board, city management, and city council, and is also available on our website. Because this Municipal Building Commission does not have any federal awards, we only issue a report on internal control, so they don't have that single audit letter similar to the city. We also audit the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board as a discrete component unit of the city. And I presented the results of our audit to the Park Board at their July 6, 2016 meeting. They also are issued a required communication letter at the end of our audit, similar to the city and MBC. Their letter does describe the Park Board implementing those pension standards as well, and their liability at the end of the year was $65.7 million, and their prior year net position was restated as well. The Park Board received an unmodified opinion. It was dated June 10th of 2016. And our opinion is included in the Park Board's annual financial statements. We issue a management and compliance report for the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and that has been emailed to Park Board management, commissioners of the Park Board, city management, city council, grantor agencies, and is also available on our website. It includes a summary of findings and question costs, which lists our opinions on the financial statements and the federal award programs. Like I mentioned, we issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, and a modified opinion on their major federal award program. This summary indicates whether there were any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses identified during the audit, and these were discussed with management in detail at their June 6, 2016 exit meeting. The summary lists the federal award program that was audited as major, and also identifies that the Park Board was also not considered a low-risk auditee, so we had to audit 40% of their federal expenditures. The Park Board's management and compliance report includes includes findings on internal control, the federal award program, and Minnesota legal compliance. And for the Park Board, we were able to resolve one finding from the prior year audit. Park Board management has provided their responses to our findings, and they are included in our report, and we are required to follow up on those in next year's audit. The Park Board's management and compliance report also includes our report on internal controls over financial reporting, which also identifies the work we did for the Park Board on legal compliance. And they have a single audit letter included in their management and compliance report, which includes our opinion on compliance for each major federal award program, the report on internal control over compliance, and a report on their schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And lastly, their management and compliance report includes their schedule of expenditures of federal awards. For 2015, the park boards received and expended $3.2 million of federal awards. We are also required to submit a report on federal awards to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse for the park board, and just like the cities, that's being worked on now since the form was just issued last Friday. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Erickson. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Go ahead.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Mhm.
I actually do.
Okay.
I have a question myself. It might be more for finance staff than Ms. Erickson, but the finding 2014-003, the network and system access termination, seems to continue to be an issue. And I was curious how, in this sampling, how did the terminated employee access PeopleSoft? Do we know if it was through the web portal or was it through a city computer? Has there been follow-up on that? And maybe I just haven't.
I just looked at that yesterday, and I don't have any information on how they access the system. When we did our testing, we were provided a query that showed the last sign-on date, and that's what we used as part of our testing. So we were able to see the date that they actually signed on, but not the method of how they did sign on.
I see. According to our internal auditor, his team conducted some work in this regard in the records management and the data audit. When they focused on PeopleSoft HR, which is different than your sampling, and they tested 100% of the population, but noted that 79%, or over 1,000 of the security profiles for employees terminated in their scope were locked after the 30-day standard. So I think you've helped us to identify something that's clearly an issue, and I know our audit team is working with HR and IT to see their audit findings to remediation. I guess in this state audit report, I don't think our long-winded response to this part of your findings is adequate. I mean, I think it's neatly written, but I don't think it's adequate because there's an opportunity here for a major security breach. This isn't an accounting error that we're trying to restate or anything. Someone accessed PeopleSoft Finance after they left, is my understanding from this. Is we don't know why they were trying. We don't know, was it them or someone else using their password? I'm afraid that our response to the state auditor's report here doesn't address the issue. I would like to ask our internal auditor through a staff direction to do a brief analysis of what happened here and maybe dig into it a little further. I get that if a supervisor doesn't tell HR that they have an employee that's quitting, and if they don't complete their offboarding procedures, then nothing happens. So I get why this is a problem. I'm afraid it's a bit of a coordination between different departments, and I think it's a problem on a supervisory level. So if I could ask, as a result of the state audit report, for our internal auditor to do a brief analysis of what will it take to really remediate this issue in the future, if that's acceptable to you, Mr. Ruff. I'd like to make sure that we get this figured out so that we don't have this next year.
Right.
So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Without any other questions? I'm sorry. Mr. Neal.
Ms. Erickson, I did have one question. Earlier you described the para-liability question for the city as being 600 or so million, and for the park board it was 65 million or something like that. Are those, is 65 within the 600, or is it a separate and distinct?
That was separate.
Number? Separate. Okay.
Thank you. If I could ask the committee to consider my motion for staff direction to our state auditor to do some follow-up on the network and termination access concern.
So moved.
All those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
Did you say the direction was to have the internal auditor or the?
Yes.
Okay.
No. To direct our internal auditor to do some follow-up work on what kind of coordination will be needed to fully remediate the situation for future years. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. May I also have a motion to receive and file these reports from our state auditor?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and those reports are received and filed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have, in our modified agenda, we have Mr. Tetzel to give the report of internal auditor to prepare. He has his regularly prepared update for our committee. Mr. Tetzel.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Will Tetzel. I'm the Director of Internal Audit for the City of Minneapolis. Give you a brief update of our audit plan. Projects completed so far since the last meeting, we've added CPED loan programs, IT projects management, and PeopleSoft web portal security, which we'll be discussing today. And projects in progress, what we've added since the last meeting is MPD third-party audit, which is in its planning phase, and Park and Recreation Board worker safety audit, which is also in its planning phase. The two projects that we haven't started that are on the plan this year are civil rights contract compliance and police body camera pre-requirement review. The legislation has come out on that since the audit plan, and the first audit of that isn't due until 2020. So we'll probably defer that one and maybe even until 2018 from a timing perspective, because that makes sense. A brief update on the state auditor findings from 2014. This is the last time you'll see these. The next time they'll be folded into the 15. There is still a few findings that have rolled forward. Like the state auditor said, the issue might not be the same, but the topic is the same in a few of those. As you'll see, there are fewer findings in the 2015 audit. And most of these are ongoing audit adjustments are corrected before the auditor's report goes out. So that one's finished, and so are prior period adjustments. The rest of them will continue to corroborate the remediation status of those and report to you. Audit findings follow-up. So we'll now start tracking and discussing in a little bit more detail the audit findings follow-up as findings from the audits that we've done in the past couple of years, or the remediation plans are starting to get finished. So you'll see there are 5 audits here with a number of findings. And the way that we've chosen to report now is in aggregate. So we'll talk about the audit, how many findings there were initially. And sometimes this might be a little bit different than how many findings were on the report, and I'll explain that. So when we do an audit, we typically have a bunch of issues that we come across, and we theme those up to be more meaningful topics, and then we report on those. Management will respond to those, and they will come up with a remediation plan to address those. Sometimes that remediation plan isn't in line with what the findings look like on the report, and rather than go through a reconciliation process every time, we adjust the number of our findings and what they are to match management's response if we agree that their response will remediate those findings and address that risk appropriately. So the number column you see here is the number of discrete remediation plans that we've worked with management to come up with. And then we'll report how many were resolved, how many remain open, and give you a range of the due dates, so when we can expect those to be completed. And then you guys we've included into the audit committee a packet with a little bit more detail, so you can dive in to those as well. But this is a good highlight. If there's any more detail needed, we can discuss that here. Obviously, there's still a lot of findings open, but we'll start to see those close as we continue. Some of these plans can take a while. Some of them might require system implementations, new processes. Findings can sometimes be hiring of an FTE, and so being a year or two out sometimes isn't unreasonable. We're also really flexible with remediation plans from the business. If people need more time or they're not getting the traction they want, we'll start to adjust our due date range. And so some of those dates may change. It's because remediation plans are taking a little bit longer. If we feel like things aren't getting done in a timely fashion, we'll bring that topic up to management, but we can also discuss that in this meeting as well. Any questions on follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Tetzel. Are there questions or comments from the committee on this update? You have more information in front of you. Nope. Great. With that completed, may I have a motion to receive and file this update from our internal auditor?
So moved.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the report will be received and filed. Thank you. Next up is actually announcements before we go into the CPED loans audit. Does anyone have any announcements? I have two. First, I just wanted to point out that we will receive an update at our next committee meeting on the TMO report that Mr. Tetzel presented at our last meeting. A lot has happened based on that work effort, and we'll look forward to an update next time. Second, I wanted to let the committee know that I've given notice of intent on the audit ordinance, just to consider some cleanup efforts and administrative changes to the section that governs our internal audit. It just provides a little bit of consistency. It clarifies how internal audit can engage in things like fraud, waste, and abuse cases, not necessarily always at the direction from us, but they will report back to us when they get involved in those kinds of things. I'm happy to discuss that and any other changes as it proceeds. Tomorrow at Committee of the Whole, it will be referred to the City Attorney's Office for language consideration. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And I'll keep you updated as things go forward. So the next item on our agenda is the CPED loans audit. This comes based on an effort with Community Planning and Economic Development Department's Loan Lifecycle Management Program. I want to thank Mr. Craig Taylor and Miles Mercer for being here in the audience with us today, and hand it over to begin the presentation with Mr. Tetzel. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A little bit of background before we even start. So in our annual risk assessment process, we meet with department heads and divisional leaders to talk about areas where risk is potentially undermanaged. And a lot of times we get ideas for projects or requests for work to do. In this case, the CPED loan audit was a request from the department. So, and we agreed that this was something that was important enough for us to spend some time on, but wanted to be clear on that this was requested of us. The city isn't in the business of profiting off of development loans, and there are a variety of reasons why these programs occur, but it's basically to provide assistance where it doesn't otherwise exist. And if you look at the city ordinance, these loan programs should be designed to promote the city's housing and economic goals. So they should be in line with those. A lot of times, the collectability of some of these loans is probably less than you would see in the banking industry, but it's because we're trying to do something that the market doesn't do naturally. MCDA was established back in 1986, and some of these loans were originated back in those days. In 2003, they merged with the city, and the CPED department was created. And the CPED operations include programs that provide financing for businesses and housing development projects in the form of loans. There's currently about $260 million in outstanding loans that were initiated under MCDA and CPED, of which about 46 million is deemed collectible, and it's about 18% collectability. Some of the loans are administered by the CPED department and with some help of finance. Others, we participate in a loan with a bank, with a financial institution. So the balance of those external loans was 7.3 million, which are considered 100% collectible. The other external loan balance was 9 million, 75% of that was collectible, And the loan C balance, which people are normally used to talking about, 243.9 million, of which 13% was collectible. Starting in 2011, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, which the state auditor just gave their presentation about, the city had to report information on the loan C balance. So some of the accounting and some of the new reporting requirements have not been a part of the embedded process that CPED and MCDA was accustomed to generating information on. And it's probably a likely why there have been a couple of audit findings around this large body of work. The objectives of the audit were to assess how effectively CPED issues, manages, and terminates loans, and to evaluate the use of what they call MINs, which is their system of record for all these loans, and how it facilitates the process, meets the needs of users, and appropriately safeguards data and records. And the reason that we had a specific focus there was because CPED is in the market to potentially replace the MINs system. It's becoming unsupportable because it's, I think, nearly 20 years old. And so we felt it would be beneficial to look at why people use it, why people don't use it, and how well it works for the needs of the business. The scope of the audit included a review of the reporting on loan portfolios, issuing, authorizing, documenting, and accounting for loans, management and monitoring of the loans, and loan satisfaction, any restructuring, and write-off procedures. The first finding is around loan program reporting. What we hoped to see or expected to see when we dug into CPED loans is really, a comprehensive profile of reports on the loan portfolio, both from a financial perspective and from an operational perspective. So how much money is coming in, how much money is going out, what are we collecting, what did we actually get, what's the difference, some of that analysis. And then two, these, as mentioned, there's a purpose for these loans. These loans are being issued for a reason. And how effective is it? Are we getting the traction that we would expect out of all of this activity? So almost what's our sort of return on investment from that untangible, how much impact are we making in the community with this effort? We found that there wasn't a comprehensive, holistic reporting on these programs. However, there was a substantial amount of reporting, but generally it didn't give a good picture of the entire portfolio itself, or in some cases even a category of loans. There was some pretty comprehensive reporting, probably some of the most comprehensive in response to the HUD grant, which we would all expect. But because these loans should align with the city's housing and economic goals, it's difficult to determine how successful we are without monitoring and reporting. The second finding was around loan C portfolio completeness. So in an audit, when we're going to test transactional information like loans, we first try to assess how complete and accurate and precise the population is. And so we did some exercises where we went to the loan files, did some sampling, and tied those to the MINS reports and vice versa. And we noticed some discrepancies there. We did this somewhat in line with the state auditor's work this year. So we were able to notify CPED that some of the reports that were that had been closed or the money had been issued weren't yet in the MINS report, and that some of the things in the MINS report should have been closed and shouldn't be there. portions of those were fixed in the state auditors, in the report that the state auditor used to do their work, but there were still some that weren't. So before we went further, we noticed that the data there that we were using to rely on wasn't complete. And so 6 of the 153 loans tested were excluded. That was a totaling $9.8 million. 1 of the 14 that we sampled that were inactive was not entered in MINS and excluded from the loan balance. And 6 of the 30 single-family projects were incorrectly tracked and recorded in MINS, and that was a balance of about $60,000. Also, we noted here that accrued interest isn't systematically tracked. It's not a material balance on the financial statements. It was never a requirement before. However, it is generally accepted accounting principle, and so we do recommend when and if they replace MINS that it's tracking accrued interest is a feasible thing and that's done. At this point in the interim, it would be too much work than it's worth. A lot of the interest is forgiven and written off, and so it's not worth tracking it by hand now or manually. It's a pretty exhaustive exercise, but a comprehensive system to manage the loans could easily accomplish this. Finding number 3 was around process improvement. So we noticed that, and as you would imagine, a lot of these loan programs have evolved, starting at different times, through different people, even in different organizations, that there was a divergence in how the loan programs were executed and the processes for these. And that makes it difficult to audit. It'll make it difficult to automate. So when and if they do replace MINS, these should be streamlined. But it's tricky to control as well. When you have X number, maybe a dozen or so different loan programs, and all of them handle things differently, whether it's the way that they handle documentation, how they use MINS, whether they're using shadow systems. They're all loans, and so there's probably a good, and we've been in discussion with CPED, but a good way to say, here's some guardrails, here's how we want the larger process to look like. Some programs can deviate a little bit because they're unique, but this is the process that we should follow. We also noticed that processing payments was rather cumbersome. MINS does not speak to Comet, our financial system, and so we receive payments into Comet. It's really difficult for CPED and finance to reconcile those payments because some of them are batched between Comet and MINS, and so it's definitely a very manual process and probably causes consternation on both sides. So MINS replacement that works well with PeopleSoft financial module would be very helpful. We also noticed when we started to look into MINS and understand what processes people use to manage these loan programs, we noticed that a lot of people were using shadow systems. So MINS wasn't getting them the information they wanted, or it was more cumbersome than they wanted. So they were creating databases or spreadsheets that they were using outside of MINS to do their day-to-day activity. This can be dangerous because as people leave the organization, as files get corrupted or lost, a lot of this source data is gone. And if the state auditor and finance are relying on MINS to be the source of truth or where all this information needs to live, it makes that more difficult to do, because then you're updating your shadow system, updating MINS. You have 2 different things going on. So it's a great time to study and understand why people are using shadow systems and working offline to make sure that those important things that they need are incorporated into that MINS replacement. Finding 4 is about roles and responsibilities. So we we looked at the assignment of who is sort of overseeing these loans. So a loan is closed, and that means the money is provided to the business or the contractor or the individual to do the activity. And then there are stipulations, there's requirements, there's payment terms. And so the CPED will assign loan coordinators to those loans in the MIN system who are responsible for keeping track of that. If you had a question about a certain loan, you would look that up and go find out who that was. We noticed that quite a few of those employees that were labeled as the overseers of these loans were either no longer with CPED, potentially no longer with the city. So keeping this information more up to date so that people understand what they have a responsibility for, and when people have questions, there's actually a current employee that they can go talk to about these. So those are our 4 findings. Obviously, in every audit that we do, there are a lot of smaller details that we discuss with the business that aren't material enough or big enough to end up on a report. With CPED loans, and it's typical to most of how we audit, depending on how mature a process is, we'll start looking at high level, right? So that's reporting, systems, processes, before we start to dig into some really granular details. And as we start to see issues pop up, at a certain point, we'll stop and say, this is enough for an audit. Because if we keep going, we'll just find things that will point back to some of these sort of more foundational issues. And so that was what the CPED loan program turned out to be, more of a high-level, broad audit looking at sort of big picture items and getting some of those issues to the forefront. So one, management can understand where they are now. The director of CPED is relatively new to the business, and so it's good for them to get a pulse of what's out there. And 2, with the MIN's replacement, looking at some of these big picture items will be really helpful. Also on the side, we did collect a lot of reasons why people were using shadow systems and working outside of MINs, and provided that to IT because they're doing their requirements gathering at the moment, so they could consider those as well. So we tried to make sure that as we were doing this audit, some of the information that we pulled out of it could be used and valuable in that MINs replacement effort as well.
Thank you, Mr. Tetzel. Are there questions or comments from the committee? Mr. Neal?
Mr. Tetzel, my question is about really on the last finding, the roles and responsibilities. There must be some accepted industry standard for the capacity that a particular employee has or a person has in terms of how many loans they can service. And I would think that servicing these types of loans has as an additional complex component to it, in that you're not just ensuring that you're getting paid, but you're ensuring that there's these intangible qualities that are being provided as well. Do you have a sense of what that metric might be and how that compares to what we have within CPED? Are people being asked to service more loans than perhaps their peers do on the private side? Do you have a sense of that?
Madam Chair, Mr. Neal, I don't. You're right. There's 2 points. One, yes, this is more than just a loan that we're closing and packaging and reselling because we're in the business to profit off of these. There's a reason that we're doing these, right? We want to impact the community. We want to help low-income housing developments occur that might not otherwise, because they are more profitable. So we're bridging some of those gaps and sort of affecting market forces there. A part of that is understanding, well, how well is that turning out, right? So it kind of ties into finding 1 too, of there's a lot of stipulations within a loan program. One of them might be these units need to stay affordable. These houses need to be green material. It could be a slew of things. But we noticed that there wasn't overall there wasn't an identification of what's important to track. Are we tracking it? And how are we bringing that information back in? I might, if you'd like, we could potentially invite someone from CPED in to talk about how many, if you think about the mature state and these are the things that we want to monitor actively, whether or not we put the onus on the person receiving the loan to say, as a part of this, you need to report back to us, and then we synthesize that information and make sense out of it, or we actively monitor some of these themselves throughout the cycle of a loan, which some of them can be decades long. If you'd like, we could.
I was really asking more if that was part of what you were looking at today, and Mr. Taylor could it's more than probably maybe what he's prepared to talk about today as well.
Yeah.
But we could do that some other
part of our
time.
analysis. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
How do I do this again? Oh, okay. Mr. Tetzel, I wanted to follow up on that perhaps a bit. I see in the report inconsistency in reporting on achievement. Probably, I think you just alluded to possibly some inconsistency in understanding what the goals may be of specific loans, inconsistency in documentation. Did you find that this was a consequence of the particular type and variety of loans that are made, or was it an individual manager determination that created some of the inconsistencies?
Madam Chair, Mr. Fisher, I don't know the root cause of it. I think that there just hasn't been a longstanding practice of comprehensive reporting, and so there was reporting when requested. So if there was reporting required by council for federal grants, when people asked for reporting, they would get it, but that reporting might not have aligned to the objectives of that loan program itself. It might have aligned to the goals of the city or the goals of CPED, but when you do that, it's really hard to gauge how successful you are and how much impact you are having when you're not measuring it against the goals of that specific loan program. And both aspects, right? So there's the financial piece and there's that operational piece. So one, how much good is happening because of this? Are we moving the needle? Are we getting where we want to go? And two, transactionally, how did we expect this to roll out, and what's it actually looking like? Are people paying, or are we having to restructure more often than we expect? And how should that impact the way that we roll these out in the future? Are we under collecting, and how should that impact? Are there certain loan programs that are much less successful than others, and should some of that funding be rerouted to where we get more, where we can be more impactful? It's hard to make some of those comparisons when reporting across the board isn't standardized and conclusive of all these certain aspects that you want to actively monitor and manage.
If you don't mind, just follow up. I noticed that in reporting, and forgive my unfamiliarity with the CPED loan program specifically, I noticed that you indicated that significant percentages of these loans are basically uncollectible. That is, small portions are collectible. Is that my understanding that some of these loans are expected to be forgivable over time if there are achievement of certain goals?
Madam Chair, Mr. Fisher, correct. A good example, I think, is we're going to help a developer open up affordable housing units, right? Well, as long as they stay affordable, the loan doesn't need to be paid back. If they turn those into market rate, then we expect that payback. So some of them, we call them loans, but they're, in actuality, they maybe act a little bit differently. But because the city doesn't grant money or just give money out, there's stipulations and there's ramifications of not adhering to loan agreement. And so some of them, yes, we don't anticipate ever getting those funds back, in hopes that what we're trying to do is achieved in perpetuity.
Thank you, Mr. Tetzel. Are there any comments or thoughts about the process of the CPED audit that CPED would like to share or to comment on at this time?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Craig Taylor. I am the Executive Director of CPED. Let me, if I may, begin by just stating for the record that the internal audit that was conducted of CPED's loan portfolio was conducted and was done so at my specific request. And I say that I think it's important for you to know that this was not initiated as a result of any party taking action because they found something wrong with our process. They found negligence or financial discrepancies or improprieties. We did this at our own discretion. I think one of the things that's important also to note here that from a functional standpoint, things are working relatively well. We are clear as a result of the audit findings that there are inefficiencies and certainly gaps in our process. But we, staff, certainly see this as an opportunity, particularly in light of the fact that I'm new, my Director of Housing is new, my Director of Economic Development is new as well. And so all of this information is certainly new to us. And so we see this as an opportunity to not only improve the process, but to maximize our performance in this area. As a matter of clarification, just to, again, reiterate what Will has already stated, the findings were in 4 key areas: loan program reporting, loan portfolio completeness, and process improvement, and roles and responsibilities. I think consistent with the process, I think it's also important to note that we, being staff, that we agree with the findings and the recommendations that have been outlined in the audit report. And certainly moving forward, we are going to work closely with the audit team, with CPED staff, certainly members of the appropriate members of council and other enterprise staff to begin to outline an action plan that will really clearly define and frame our approach to addressing these critical issues moving forward. I'd also like to take the opportunity, if I may, to have Henry Reimer, who's my operations director, who really worked very closely with Will in kind of orchestrating this process, to talk about one of the potential solutions or tools that we see to help address a lot of the problems that have been identified here. Henry? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, good morning. I am Henry Reimer. I am CPED's Operations Director. And one of the kind of central elements that was identified in this internal audit was the status of our MINS system. That's a Management Information Network system. And it really is a technology backbone of our loan programs management, amongst some other things. And Will had mentioned that this system was implemented in the mid-90s. It is antiquated. The platform on which it's based is no longer supported. And its limitations are really a source of a lot of the issues that have been identified in this audit, such as shadow systems, spreadsheets used as workarounds, as well as dual entry that's needed, and the concomitant errors that result from that. So we've initiated a process to replace MINS, and we initiated that process prior to the internal audit identifying this issue because we saw the need to replace this system. This technology project is going to play a central role in identifying the issues that have been identified. So we're working with the IT department as well as finance and property services, and we're currently in the preliminary stages, and we're examining our business processes, and we will be re-engineering many of them and improving them. This project will improve coordination of work across programs and divisions. It will improve reporting by centralizing project, parcel, and program data. This new technology, as Will mentioned, would will enable us. We are planning on to track accrued interest and eliminate that dual entry problem I just mentioned. So we are continuing with the MINS replacement project, and it is our #1 priority for our capital asset request for 2017. We have initial funding this year, which has allowed us to get this started. And we feel very confident that that funding will be forthcoming as our capital asset request for 2017. And it will be a central role in playing and a necessary role in the development of our remediation plan.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. That adds some color and some detail. I also failed to acknowledge some others in the audience here. Mr. David Frank is here in the audience. Angie Skildum is in the audience. Miss Andrea Brennan, Mr. Reimer, and Mr. Mercer. Thank you all for being here. I do hope that this was a valuable process. This was initiated by CPED, by Mr. Taylor. And I do hope that Mr. Taylor, as a new-ish CPED leader, if I'm still new, sir, you also are still new. I hope you can use these findings to evolve this part of CPED's work to a more robust and transparent and well-controlled future state. It really sounds like you're taking this seriously, and I appreciate the effort here. It seems clear at this point, per Mr. Reimer's detail, that there's a possibility of budget implications as a result of this report. So I'd like to also direct this report to Mayor Hodges' office for consideration in the 2017 budget conversations, as we do and as we've done with other reports. Here's my proposition for motion. May I have a motion to receive the CPED Department's Loan Life Cycle Management Audit, to direct staff to publish this report, to refer it to City Council, and refer the report to the mayor for consideration in her upcoming budget cycle?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the report will be received, and staff will publish it and take those further actions. Thank you all for being here. The next item on our agenda is the IT Program and PMO Project Management Office Review Memo. Here again, to begin the presentation is Mr. Tetzel. I'd also like to welcome Mr. Nikhil D'Souza from Backbone Consultants, who assisted in this effort. So to start this off, Mr. Tetzel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the Audit Committee is aware of, or should be aware of, or will now be reminded of, we outsource our IT audit capability. IT auditing is such a broad topic that trying to find one person that could adequately audit and cover and be knowledgeable about all the new things and that are coming up with technology would be virtually impossible. And so we're able to outsource that to a local firm that's done a really good job of adapting to our approach, to our audit approach with the city, and working well with the departments. So I would like to introduce Nikhil D'Souza, who is a partner and CFO with Backbone Consulting, to walk us through the IT projects management, privacy, and security consultation.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Audit Committee. As Will introduced earlier, the primary consultation that was done over here was on the IT Project Management Office. And the main purpose of the Project Management Office is to have processes, tools, procedures, and documents to help guide an IT project throughout their life cycle. Like every other project, whether it be IT or non-IT, there are varying sizes and complexities of the project, so it's not a cookie cutter, one project methodology fits all. I do want to call that out in the beginning because I want to recognize Mr. Dalato's team and the CIO department who have done a great job in putting up a good program. There were just a couple of areas where we had identified some improvement on. Overall, from a project perspective, there may be multiple phases depending on the methodology the project manager chooses to employ, but there are 4 key main phases that each project will go through. The first one is planning, and during the planning phase is where you select a vendor, if you are going to use a vendor for the implementation. You do a risk assessment and try and identify what your key risks are throughout the project. You define your project goals and scope, as well as create the overall project plan. Now, during the project planning evaluation, there were 2 key areas where we identified opportunities on. And the first one being is during the RFP process. During the request for proposal, what we identified was that there were no key security and privacy questions to be asked of from the vendor or from a vendor reference check with respect to have there been any data breaches, how would you manage a data breach if you had one, or if you have any vulnerabilities or other compliance requirements that you haven't met in the past. So this was brought to the attention of the ITPM group, and they will be actually creating an entire risk management program, which includes a questionnaire specific to security and privacy as part of their program going forward. And it's expected to be completed in September 2016. Any questions on that one?
No.
So moving on, the second one was more on the project definition and risk assessment. And what we noted out here was during the definition of a project, there were no key security and privacy scoping considerations. Once again, I'd like to call out that not all projects would require the same scrutiny. However, thank you.
I see there are slides that go
There are
with this.
slides to go on.
I was curious. Okay.
More on during the definition and risk assessment is to make sure that there is actual definition considered, so you do have your scoping considerations for security and privacy embedded within the project. That kind of plays into the second aspect, which is the risk assessment. There was a very good formal risk assessment methodology in place for the IT projects. However, there was no explicit security and privacy risks that should be considered during a project risk assessment. The ITPMO group agrees on that, and they're creating a new risk management section that will be included in the the overall risk assessment program that is expected to be in place by November of 2016. Any questions? Move on. The third one was more a broader base issue that spans the testing and deployment phases of a project. And the main reason why I brought this up is because the access that a project team requires during the project lifecycle may not be the access the project team member needs once the system is live. So if you're testing a system, you might have multiple IDs you're using because you want to test different functionalities. However, that same user should not have access to all of those IDs in your production live system because you want them to only have minimal access needed for their job responsibilities. The same applies for a lot of vendors that do come in that help in the development process. They should not continue to have that access as you move through the entire landscape into your production environment. So one of the recommendations we did come up with is over here is to define a formal access management plan to identify what type of access is needed by each member of the project, during which phases, and when should that access be removed. One key one over there to call out is after the system is live in production. It's about 90 days or 30 to 90 days, depending on the size of the project, that the project team continues to have access to troubleshoot quickly, to make sure things go smoothly. So making sure that access is removed upon the completion of the project so that you are no longer having that elevated privileges for ongoing operations. A subcomponent of the access management plan is the communications protocol. The city does have a good communication plan to send out updates, project reports, as well as other items that may be considered sensitive to both members within the city staff as well as vendors. However, when it came down to secure communications for certain intellectual property or item that may contain social security numbers or sensitive data, there was no secure protocol method established for encrypting a message and sending it out. So our recommendation was to come up with a standard and a detailed procedure to help the project team with their communication network channels to be secured so as to not have any loss of intellectual property or sensitive data while moving data within the city's network or from outside to inside the network. The last one we identified during this consultation was more the approval gates. As I mentioned earlier, there are 4 key phases of a project. One is the plan, the other one is build, execute, testing, and deploy. When you move from the plan phase to a build phase, and then from the build to the testing phase, you have your stakeholders get together in a meeting to make sure everybody is in agreement with what was achieved, what wasn't achieved, what the key risks are, as well as any key findings that or risk accepts that maybe the project team as a whole would like to take. One of the items noted over here was to have the security team have an approval or a seat on the board for moving the project to the next phase. Like I mentioned earlier, not all projects are the same size or the same complexity. So it's not necessary that there will be security approval at every gate to move forward. However, if there's a formal risk assessment done earlier on, it would help identify where the security team needs to be involved to sign off on in order to move to the project to the next phase. All of this recommendation was the prior one, were both agreed upon by the ITPM group, and they have changes that they're putting in place that will be effective November 2016 to help remediate these issues. Any questions?
Not for you, Mr. D'Souza. I have a few at the end for Mr. Dahl. Are you through?
Yep, I'm done with my part.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the committee on this one? Great. I do have a couple of questions. They're perhaps more appropriate for Mr. Dahl, and I haven't given you any advance notice on this, sir, so I understand if you don't feel prepared to answer them, but I'm curious from this review and in reading this report, Mr. Dahl, what do you feel are the top factors that derail system implementations from your perspective?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Audit Dahl, CIO for the city of Minneapolis. I think one of the biggest challenges IT has had with security and privacy concerns has been a lack of sufficient resources to work in this area. Prior to me coming on board 5 years ago, there was no one fully dedicated to security within the IT realm. I did have one person that really services the organization as a chief information security officer who's been in place since 2011. In 2013, I was able to acquire 2 additional positions. And so that has given us some folks to actually work on particularly things like policy and procedures and just have the wherewithal to deal with the numerous security activities that really have to take place. So I think, we've taken a road of trying to increase our capacity to deal with security and privacy concerns. Second, of course, is I think the bad actors and just in general what people can do with security, it's forever a changing environment out there. It seems like those bad actors kind of stay ahead of the curve. And so we're constantly having to evolve, I should say, our capabilities to deal with these issues. A lot of that has to deal with just literally the software and technologies that you actually have to deploy. And so we have a tendency to be dealing more with, I would call, more day in and day out operational things than working in particularly this area where, okay, we have numerous projects and do we have sufficient checks on security and privacy? Bottom line is we've recognized this issue and in trying to assemble enough manpower to allow us to start to address and be more formal with our processes in ensuring that things are secure and safe within the city's information systems is our goal. And so we are attempting to get there. Finally, I think that, today, for instance, we have 36 major projects that are currently underway. We have another 52 projects, minor ones on top of that. We have another 117 task orders that go through our process. That's a whole series of things that are going on in the city. This is a very automated world and getting so more and more every day. So, that will be a constant challenge for us to be able to keep up with everything. But it starts with having good processes and policies in place. And then it's just a matter of whether or not you can execute in all appropriate circumstances. And so that, I think, will probably be the next challenge once we get all these in place is, can we truly execute on everything we should be executing on fully? And we'll keep plugging away at it.
Thank you. You already anticipated my second question, which was, do you feel you're lacking some resources? And you've gone into detail on that. But the only other question I had is, what is your perspective of these recommendations? What can we do better? Did you find this audit to be helpful? Any thoughts that you wanted to express on that?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I think what's useful is it gives people an overall perspective of the challenge, and it allows the IT department to give the reasoning behind why we are seeking additional resources, which, by the way, I am asking for additional resources in this budget cycle, as well as just understanding and giving people an expectation of what's going to be required in the future. And I think that's really useful as we go and work with our clients, the departments, in the various IT projects that we're working on. And I think that from that standpoint, it really helps for folks to have sort of that emphasis that's being applied from other quarters, in this case, from an audit perspective. It's not like we haven't had audits come in here before and say specific things, and we've had to address those. So I think that the process itself is good for kind of getting it out on the table and dealing with it. All things said, people always want stuff now or yesterday. And so that's a constant challenge in meeting the needs of the business while also being prudent, in this case, in security and privacy. So I really think that that's important, that people keep in mind that there are really good reasons for stepping back and doing these sorts of activities in order to ensure that we're ultimately safe and so forth. One of the challenges of anything in the security realm, until you're hacked, until there's a breach, thank goodness we haven't had that to any great degree here, it's out of sight, out of mind. And I always want to try to stay ahead of that potential from happening here in the city.
Thank you. So do we. Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Dahl, is there a resource or number of resources you can refer to help you stay ahead of the hackers and the types of security risks that might happen, or do we just wait until there's an actual event that requires us to react?
Madam Chair, Mr. Fisher, there are numerous resources that we're plugged into. There's various programs that are set up by federal agencies, particularly the FBI, that we're a party to. So we get intel from those different organizations as to what seems to be the trends of the bad actors that are going on, and then we make adjustments relative to what we're seeing and dealing with. Every week I get a report from my security group as to recent events and potentially any impacts or investigations that we've done relative to late breaking or current activity by bad actors that may be having that might have some impact on the city in the way of our positioning ourselves to be protected. So there's a lot of things that we're doing from outside intel, number one. Number two, of course, is the vendors, software and hardware products that we make use of are there trying to keep up with those same bad actors. And so obviously, to some degree, we're relying on them to keep us safe. What we do is ensure that whether it's a signature of malware that we're getting into our systems appropriately as quickly as possible, we're relying on them to give us those things. So it's not to say that we're waiting for something bad to happen. It's just that it's this when do you supply enough resources to take on the challenge or increase your resources? A lot of time it's when an event occurs and then people add. And so I've been very diligent, at least I feel, in the 5 years I've been here, in pushing the security agenda in the IT realm for the city. So that, again, we hopefully always stay ahead.
Great. Thank you for that additional information. I think it was helpful. May I have a motion to receive the IT Program and Project Management Office Review Memo to direct staff to publish the report and to refer it to City Council?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and that report will be received, and staff will publish it. All right, that completes what I think is the public portion of our agenda. The last item on our agenda, and thank you for going through all these different topics with me today. The last item on our agenda is the PeopleSoft Web Portal Security Audit Report. Our committee will adjourn to room 315, which is right across the hall for this audit due to its sensitive nature. Thank you.
There's 14 copies.